Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years, pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. This week on the podcast, I have a conversation with Michele Lawrence, founder and owner of the school Inner Peace Yoga Therapy, which, in full disclosure, I did graduate from about 13 years ago now. Now, I asked Michele to come on the podcast to chat about her experience in trying to advocate for folks who are either yoga therapists or who run yoga therapy schools when the International Association of Yoga Therapists, the IAYT, announced their initiative to let licensed healthcare practitioners, those are LHCPs, skip the line and become yoga teachers without previous practice or training, and thusly allowing them to become the de facto therapeutic yoga professionals in the medical space. This, for those of you who are following along, is still a very real possibility. There is no reason for us to believe that the IAYT has changed course in any way for their plans to provide a cheat code for LHCPs, and ultimately force the entire yoga therapy community into the clinician realm of work. Which, I'm going to be honest, I would be less mad about if they had asked us for our opinions first. But turns out, I did just that. Now, that happened in the Future of Yoga Therapy Facebook group that we talk about a lot on this series. You're invited. Feel free to join us. And a lot of folks do not want to integrate into medical settings as yoga professionals. A lot of us see a better, more ethical path outside the medical space, and that very much includes me. Now, Michele and I chat about this, and honestly so much more in this talk, and I can't wait for you all to hear what she has to say. But before we begin, will you please go ahead and do that like, follow, subscribe thing from wherever you're listening? And if you love the content of the podcast, please go ahead and drop a 5-star review so that more folks can connect with us. And also, as I said a couple podcasts ago, I am not taking sponsors for this series on the podcast. I don't want anyone interfering in any way with what I or my guests might have to say on this. But if you are interested in my tea shop, blending up a custom tea blend for your yoga studio or yoga classes, reach out. I'd love to help you out. Rebecca at workinginyoga.com or Rebecca at thesunlightexperience.com. Get you where you need to go. Now, let's chat with Michele Lawrence. Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Okay, so this week on the podcast, I have honestly my original mentor in yoga therapy, Michele Lawrence from Inner Peace Yoga Therapy, which, full disclosure, I graduated from y'all 1,000 years ago when I was much younger, more energetic. Michele, tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Hi, everybody. And first of all, thank you so much, Rebecca, for having me on here. It's really awesome to be in conversation with you. So yeah, I'm the founder and director of Inner Peace Yoga Therapy. I started that school in 2009, and we're one of the accredited yoga therapy programs and have been since 2014 when accreditation became a thing. And so I oversee the operations and the needs of the students and put forth the program in the world. And of course, we work with a lot of amazing faculty at Inner Peace Yoga Therapy too.
So this podcast is part of the series, I like to work in series, about the IAYT, the Q-designation, yoga therapists, and the future of yoga therapy. So we have a big bucket to talk about. Let's start specifically. So you're the first person who's been on in this series that has a school. So I feel like there's a really unique perspective for you to share with us about what it means for us to professionalize, what it means for us to train as yoga therapists, because you own a school. Like that's your job, is you're training us.
Mm.
So talk to me about the Q designation and what it is to host a school, etc. Go.
Okay, great. And so maybe just for clarification and background too, an accredited yoga therapy program like ours is one that has 800 hours of curriculum that meets certain standards and goes through a rigorous accreditation program. So a student coming into a school like ours usually studies for 2 or more years to become a yoga therapist. And it's a lot of work and it's a professional path, yet we know that this is still an emerging profession. More to come on that as we converse here.
Yeah.
And so, one thing to say too is I've been involved with the IAYT really since 2009. And so I've had the experience of becoming an accredited program, really even before that, seeing how long it took to put the standards in place to become an accredited yoga therapy offering, and how seriously and rigorous that was, and how seriously the certification was put out in the world too. And so the Q designation is basically a shortcut, really, a shortcut. It's a fast track. So not only is it something that is much shorter in duration, it's 300 hours as opposed to 800 hours, but it was specifically designed for healthcare providers to take this training so that they could start offering yoga therapy. And when this was announced last year, kind of around this time last year, actually, I was stunned.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
stunned because I had never heard of it before. And just knowing how the IOIT worked to kind of get to the professional standards for the 800-hour curriculum, I thought to myself, this can't be live yet. This must be just like the initial, we're seeking your input period phase of this. And I quickly found out that that wasn't true. And so that's what the Q is. And the interesting and other interesting thing to note is that so many folks who train to be 800-hour yoga therapists are already healthcare providers of some kind.
Yeah.
So, and the
Yep.
IAYT knows this. They actually shared that data with us. But if we look at a typical inner peace cohort, I think that's about 30%, maybe 25 to 30% of those students coming in already have some other kind of designation. So one of the problems I saw was, well, this means that, from a school's perspective, we're going to lose. We're going to lose out because students are not going to take our full program that we are putting forth as sort of the primary way to become a yoga therapist.
So let me ask you this question, because this is sort of, we're going to push into the bigger conversation around yoga therapy in general.
Yeah.
I'm going to push into the healthcare question. I've pushed into the healthcare question a lot in this series because I have it's complicated feelings about us working in and or adjacent to healthcare, and if we push towards licensure. Now, I would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, like you said, it's complicated and there's a lot to it. And by the way, there's a lot more to the whole Q thing that I'm not going to get into right
Yeah.
here and now. But we'll talk about sort of the ripple effects and the multifacets of it. But when we talk about yoga in healthcare, right? First of all, I'd like to say that most of our certified trained yoga therapists through Inner Peace do not work in healthcare. They
Yep.
work in private practice. Some of them do, and some of them don't do that exclusively either. They may teach a couple classes at the VA, and they also have a private practice, for example, or maybe they, work in some other healthcare setting, but that's alongside what else they do. There are some of our graduates that are working exclusively as professional yoga therapists at hospitals. So I think that's one thing to note. Like most yoga therapists I know are not jumping to go work in a hospital. Okay.
Yep.
So then the other part of your question had to do with licensure, I think, right?
Yep.
And actually, before I even get to the licensure piece, I think that it's beneficial for healthcare providers to take some yoga therapy training or a
Yeah.
workshop or yoga training, so
Yes.
that they understand what it is that we're doing and how it could be a complementary piece of their offering. Then they can choose to do a full yoga therapy certification if that's a path that they really want to incorporate and work with in their client base. So I've always been for that. In fact, we've always marketed modules of our yoga therapy curriculum to healthcare providers. The difference is we're not giving them a designation, we're not giving them a certification, and we're not taking away the lead here, where the lead, I believe, needs to be the yoga therapist in terms of offering yoga therapy. So that is one thing I didn't say before that I think is really important. And then when we look at licensure, the answer that I have is I don't know. I don't know if yoga therapists should be licensed or not. I think there are pros and cons to it. From the pro side, it could give us the legitimacy that we so seek and that we haven't had. And it could completely then separate out who is a licensed yoga therapist and who is not. And then when working in healthcare, a hospital system, for example, would only hire licensed yoga therapists, right? There wouldn't be this fear of it going to someone else, whether it's a yoga teacher or some other kind of healthcare provider. We'd know exactly what this credential meant. And I think we do have a problem right now around what does this credential mean? And we have for a long time.
Yeah.
So in some ways, maybe it would solve that problem. And that is a big pain point. That's a big pain point amongst yoga therapists. I see it all the time. And I would love to help take that pain point away. From the con side, there are many that would say, well, why are we putting regulation on yoga therapy? It's an indigenous practice, which it is. And how can we get the government involved in the regulation of that? And I'm of course like really distilling that down very much. And I
Yeah.
understand that completely too. And that's why I'm not sure. However, I'd love to see actually a full-blown exploration of it. And of course, licensure is not something that you do at the US level. It's state by state. So different states could pursue it or have an exploration of it to see if it makes sense, and other states could follow suit. And then I wonder too, like if, say, in the state of Colorado, where I live, there was a pursuit of licensure for yoga therapists, could then some yoga therapists opt to become licensed or not, right? And if you do not want to be a licensed yoga therapist for the many reasons, could you operate without licensure? And maybe yes, and maybe no. So, like, those are all the different angles I'd love to have a really deep look at before I felt like I could say yes or no to licensure.
Yeah, I feel like you've really exactly pointed out, bullet pointed the same questions that I have. I mean, and that's part of the it's complicated feeling, partially because, as you said earlier, most of your graduates are not operating primarily in a healthcare environment. I have certainly taught therapeutic yoga classes in healthcare environments, but I have what we keep referencing as a portfolio career, right? I do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and sometimes I contract with this, and sometimes I'm contracted with that. Part of that is that's how we have to pay our bills, that's how we have to build our career. Do you think that yoga therapy specifically could be marketed, advertised, advocated for in a way that's different than what we're seeing now, that would not require us to have to do 500 things?
Hmm. Well, that's a big question. I think, and it comes down to more than marketing, right?
Sure.
So I think what it requires, first of all, and this is going to go back to the Q designation for a moment, because instead of working on that, I think what many of us, myself included, would have loved the IAYT to further was the advancement of the profession for yoga
Yes.
therapists. So what does that look like, right? And
Yeah.
these are some of the, and I know that they have done that too. So I don't want to say they have done nothing, right? Because that would not be a true statement. I just feel like there's so much more that we could do. And what does that include, right? And I think it also is, it comes down to there's a huge need for yoga therapy. There's a huge need. There's enough. There's enough. We don't have to fight over scraps. Right now, it feels
Yep.
like people are fighting over scraps. And so we need to really shift that mindset and focus on, highlight, and promote what is so successful out there. Right now, the way that the IAYT has introduced the Q designation, we're now afraid that we're going to lose our jobs versus advance our jobs.
Yeah.
So, what I'm talking to inner peace students about is, what would make you be more successful? What would make you be more successful? And so they're telling me, right? And we're having monthly sanghas amongst inner peace graduates where they're getting advice on like how to structure their business and how to improve their SEO and where to collaborate. I am now doing all this grant-based work in my community, how to find grants so that yoga therapy can be more accessible in our community. I'm sharing that out with inner peace students. So like all of these things are going to help the professional yoga therapist be more successful. All of those things and more, right? What is the model for the delivery of service and how do you price it? Should you have a subscription-based site? Like all of those things,
Yeah.
right? And those to me are super exciting, right? Like I have a master's in business. I'm an
Yep.
entrepreneur. You have to be, by the way, in order to be a successful yoga therapist, unless you're working with someone else who is. Um, and so we're building something, like we're building a membership site called Yoga Therapy Collective, where yoga therapists can get these resources to be more successful. That's what I think the IAYT should be doing. I'm not interested in, certification standards and publications and accredit. Like I'm not interested in that part of what the IAYT just does, just to be clear. I'm interested in making yoga therapists successful, right? There's so much
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah, you highlighted exactly what I was going to ask you next, which is what is the IAYT's role in making our profession successful? And what is like,
Mm.
because I think there are success can be measured in a few different ways. And the two things that I think I hear over and over again as I'm asking people that we're seeing when I ask in the Facebook group is that we want gravitas. We want to feel like what our work is important. And it is. We have amazing people in our community doing work that would just blow your brains if you
Yeah,
really got to know what was happening in the yoga therapy space.
that's
And
right.
then we also want to be able to eat well enough that we can take vacations. Like like those
Mhm.
two things I think are really important to us. And for some reason, we seem very focused on who has what letter behind their name instead of being like, wow, this is really a problem. Can the IAYT fix that problem though? Is the question. Is that their job or is that our job?
Mm. Well,
I mean, I know what I think, but I'm curious what you think.
yeah, I think it's all of our jobs,
Yeah.
honestly. I think it's all of our jobs. And I think the IAYT does have a big role in that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the way in which the Q program was rolled out, which in my opinion was without member input, without due diligence, even though they may say otherwise, it leads me to note that there are larger issues there within that organization that may or may not be fixable. And I hope I hope they are. So I feel like that organization needs to shift and focus on some new priorities and set a new strategic plan. And that's huge. And in the meantime, let's just
Yeah.
please be done with this Q thing because it really is creating a lot of heartache and problem. And at this point, it's been paused, which I'm so grateful for. But let's put it aside and focus on the bigger issues and up level the field.
Well, and I know you've been in industry for a very long time, as have I. Sometimes when I look at this IAYT challenge that they're facing right now, I
Mm.
think of where the Yoga Alliance was in like 2009,
Hmm.
2008, where the industry was exploding in a way that they, as an organization, were unprepared to follow. I mean, the Yoga Alliance, like I pick on them a
Yeah.
lot on this podcast, but a lot of the challenges we have aren't their fault. They weren't ready for what
Mm.
happened to
Mm.
yoga in the teens of this
Mm.
century.
Hmm.
And I see that here in the IYT too, is that it's a lack of foresight and understanding of what we potentially are on the threshold of.
Yeah.
If that does that make sense?
It does. And, I think maybe this is a moment to say, hey, IAYT, maybe you were onto something with this Q program, right? Maybe you were trying to like navigate, and that's exactly what they're going to say. Like they were trying to find an inroad into healthcare. And there's got to be a better way to do it
Yeah.
that recognizes that yoga therapists need to take the lead. We are the International Association of Yoga Therapists. So how about we do a take two on the Q program
Yeah.
and look at really what are the opportunities of yoga in healthcare? How will it advance the field overall? And what's the best way to do it? And for that, they need member input. And that's where we're starting again. So if we can scrap the queue, start again, get the input, there's great minds here, much smarter than me, who have much more experience working with healthcare systems
Yeah.
that I know can come up with some um, really cool opportunities. And I know that many of them have been discussed in your Facebook group, the
Yes.
future of yoga therapy, things like continuing medical education, things like, maybe as yoga therapists, we should take on the role of health educator in the healthcare system. Things like, and I like this one, this is Amy Wheeler's idea, like let's do 200 hours for healthcare providers to give them a basis of yoga. Many of them do 200-hour trainings because they have
Yeah.
to if they want to study more. But let's come up with those so that they do really point folks down an eventual path of yoga therapy. And there's other ideas too.
Do you think, from what you know right now of the IYT, and you can just tell me you don't want to answer this if you want to, are they prepared as an organization to do that? Do you think?
To start all over again?
Yeah. Do they have the I'm going to choose my word carefully. Do they have the capability within the house that they currently are living in to
Hmm.
do that again? Or do we need something different?
I think that they have the capability to do it. They came up with the Q program, right? And uh, and they they did it in such a way that we'd never want to do again. So if the way that that came about, if we carried that model forward, then we need somebody different. We need something different. I think that we need leadership who is ready to take on this new future of yoga therapy in a way that's democratic with the whole organization. And if we don't have that today, then we need leaders that are willing to do that.
Do you think so? And this has been, as you know, my big beef with the IYT is that I want them to democratize. I
Mm.
want them to be able to I want them to be legally required to
Mm.
listen to what we have to say. Um, do you feel like that's possible? Do you feel like that's actually possible? Can I get loud enough, Michelle, to force
Mm.
them to do that? because I can
I
get
don't
real loud. Like I've been
I don't
pretty, this
know
is
if it's
me, diet
possible or
me.
not. I like to start with anything is possible, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't have enough relationship there with the individuals at that level to know if it's possible. I don't know exactly where things stand on so many different levels either. So unfortunately, I can't answer that.
Okay, so let's create our rosiest picture of an organization that is out there advocating for us as professionals.
Mm,
What are
hmm
what are they doing?
mm, mm. Well, I think they are working with healthcare systems. I think they're investing in marketing so that we know what a CIAYT is out in the world. I think that they are um, doing more success story kind of stuff for the yoga therapists who are out there already today. Um, Kind of really upping those resources for current members. I think that we need to kind of know the answer around like what is the long-term goal with the WHO, for example? And are yoga therapists, if we're not going to pursue licensure, are we considered um, qualified healthcare providers ourselves? That's
Oh,
actually what I thought. I thought that they were going for the QHP designation for us. And
oh.
yeah, yeah. And so um, that would be great that if they could focus on that.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And again, I know that they're doing some of these things, but we have such little insight into it. And because there's such
Mhm.
little insight into it, it feels like they're not doing anything. And it would be
Yes,
unfair to say they're doing nothing, where they've done nothing for me. And I do hear those things thrown around a lot because that's not true, right? But we just
yes.
don't know, and let's have more visibility into what are they doing. And yeah, the Q program, I think, just really highlighted how much lack of transparency there is.
That to me seems like I could probably we could talk another hour and a half just about transparency. Like I can't tell you as a person who graduated with a comms degree how much I want their comms so badly. Like somebody just give it
Mm.
to me for a week and tell me what's going on so we can tell everybody what's
Mhm.
actually happening.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
I actually that is the thing that I deeply worry about for them as an organization. Now, I've looked up all of their records on GuideStar and I know how much they make every year and I've seen all their line items. They're not a big enough organization to be able to sustain the level of PR challenge that this Q
Mm.
designation has brought them. It's gonna be
Mhm.
a real problem. And I
Mm.
want them to tell us what they're doing. Even when they tell
Mhm.
us good things, it's terrible.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
are you seeing that too? And would a different organization, or if they were the rosiest version of themselves, would they be talking to us more?
Mm. I feel like I see that too, to answer your question. And there's been this conversation of maybe the IAYT needs to split in two, right? So there's a
Yeah,
membership organization, and then there's the side that deals with accreditation and certification.
yeah,
And apparently that's really expensive to do, right? To split
yes,
into two. But I think that that would make them way more effective, is to have clearer charters for both sides of the house. And maybe today they just can't do it all, right? And what would it
yeah.
take to get to the next level?
My dream would be that we would have one organization that just trains every level of yoga professional from the ground through what a really skilled yoga therapist would be. Like could we have one organization that their only job was our training? Because I see there to be a challenge in between the idea of are you an organization that advocates for training or are you an organization that advocates for the workers, for the professionals? Because the
Mm,
best needs of both of those groups are not the same.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. I mean, but when you have one organization, it kind of feels like a monopoly to me.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough.
You know, it almost sounds to me like for the workers model is more like a union, right?
Yeah.
And and so maybe that's a different model to look into. And I feel like, yeah, I feel like we have the opportunity to maybe spin off instead of have one organization spin off the part that helps promote the advancement of yoga therapists.
What do you think you would like to see yoga therapists do 10 years from now? How are we working in a decade from now that's different
Yeah.
than what we're doing today?
Yeah, that conversation I really like too. And this is, I think, another opportunity out there. So there's the opportunity to promote the yoga therapists and make them more successful today. I think there's another opportunity around the delivery of yoga therapy services.
Mm,
So if we're talking
yes.
specifically about healthcare, which is not, again, the only way that yoga therapy happens, what if all the healthcare systems knew that you go to this platform where all the, and I'm going to call it a platform, right? You know, it could be something like BetterHelp, for example. It's not that, right? But it's a platform for yoga therapists only. And so if you're a corporation or a healthcare system, or some other entity that wants to connect its end users, employees, patients to a yoga therapist or a yoga therapy class or a portal of yoga therapy resources pre-recorded, for example, this is where you go, right? And as a yoga therapist, I want to get on there and I should be able to get on there, right? And I don't necessarily have to get those corporate contracts. I can also be the place where people who want one-on-one yoga therapy from any walk of life can go. I think there's a problem right now where healthcare doesn't know how to point people to yoga therapy. And that's
Yeah.
why, any yoga will do sometimes. And that's another problem that we face, right? Because we're competing with someone who has very minimal yoga training as well. So now we're competing with doctors who have a shortcut yoga therapy training and someone who is a very minimally trained yoga teacher, right? Where can we be the place where uh, individuals who want yoga therapy can go and healthcare systems can connect with those who really know how to deliver yoga therapy?
That is a hell of a good idea, Michelle.
I
Oh
know,
my
I
God.
almost
Did
feel
you
like I
see
want
my
you to,
face?
I
I
feel
was
like I
like,
want you to edit it out of the podcast.
I mean, that for so many reasons, that's a really good
Yeah,
idea. This,
I
I mean,
know.
because
And it's happening. It's happening. At least in a
like,
little seed of an idea over here that has got some legs to it.
ah, that's a, I love you so much. Like, we need more people with business degrees in this industry, Michelle.
Well, yeah, and we need more yoga therapists in the world. I
We
believe
do.
that. I don't feel like the Q thing has ruined yoga therapy. In fact, what it did was highlight the fact that yoga
Yeah.
therapy is needed.
Yeah.
And what we
Yeah.
just need to do is preserve the fact that yoga therapy is delivered by yoga therapists.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. Like this Q designation has been super interesting because while the designation itself is just, it's a hot mess. But what it's highlighted is actually really exciting and has pushed us forward in conversations in ways that I haven't seen in so long. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we haven't been talking about our futures like this, I think, since when did we get the CIYT? Like 2016?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I haven't seen conversations like that, and that's
Yeah.
nearly a decade.
Right. It's good and it's good what you're doing. managing that Facebook group. I have no idea how you do that, honestly. It would take all of the life out of me. So, and it's just it's incredible to see the depth of
Yeah.
commitment people have, the breadth of ideas that people have. Um, yeah, it's really amazing to witness.
I get very excited about it again because comms is my kink here, but also because I think people have this idea about what yoga and yoga professionals are in their heads that is so different from who we actually are. Like the amount of passion and intelligence and innovation that is required for us to
Mm,
even still be paying our bills and doing this job, I think
hmm
people have no idea.
hmm hmm Yeah, so true. Yeah, and I think as a program director, as a school director, I get to witness all of those amazing individuals that are doing this work at a grassroots level all over the US and beyond. Most of our students are US based, and of course, there are yoga
Yeah.
therapists all over the world, and some of our students are in other parts of the world too. And for all of these years, like that's what's kept me in it is just to see how far reaching the benefits are and how amazing the individuals are who step up to do this work.
Okay, so here's another reoccurring theme that has happened throughout the course of recording these episodes is that I'm hearing the phrase master's level training. Now,
Mm,
do you think we are at 800 hours as master's level training, or do you feel like there's space 5, 10 years from now for there to be people operating in the yoga space who are getting 2,000 hours of training versus 1,000 hours of training plus all the added work, training, and work that we do? Do you think that's necessary?
well, I think that people could argue that one in a variety of ways. I don't have a super strong opinion about additional hours and where we go from here. What I do believe is true is that most of the work, most of the advancement that takes place in the life of a yoga therapist is by doing the actual work, not by
Yep.
getting more training at a certain point. The trainings are great. And, as the program director, I get to sit in on trainings year after year after year. And we've brought in new teachers, and I'm going to continue to study that way. And I know so many people who also take on the position of lifelong learner. I'm sure you're one
Yeah.
of those people too. And
Yes.
so yeah, to all that. And you gotta get out there and practice yoga
Yeah.
therapy and do the day to day to day to day in order to really become more advanced at it in a way.
Yeah. So I'm glad you said that because we do weirdly have that trap over and over again within both yoga teaching and yoga therapy of like just one more training, just one more 40 hours. If I only have 100 more hours of insert, whatever. Right now, what's trending is trauma informed training. If only I have trauma informed training, then I'll be enough. Like there, it feels like that's the sort of esoteric question behind this is how do we tell people that we're enough as professionals so we can get to
Mm,
work because our work is
mm,
amazing.
mhm. I think that comes through the testimonial and progress of your clients.
Mm,
So if you have clients who can testify to the fact, and if you have the conviction yourself as a yoga therapist that yoga therapy works, then you get the message that you're onto something, that you're doing good in the world.
yeah. Oh, I like that. That's good. Because we do have to talk to our people. Like, that's what keeps me going every time. I joke sometimes every time I feel like I'm gonna quit, which yesterday was a day that I was like, I'm chucking it all in and I'm just gonna sell feet pictures at the library online. That's all I'm
Feet
doing.
pictures. I don't even know what you're talking about. My dream
I'm
job
sick.
is to work in a dog biscuit bakery.
Isn't it funny? We still all have like our whatever, our dream job. But then somebody hands me a note or somebody sends me an email or somebody says, "Thank goodness you're here. This work you're doing is incredible." And
Yes.
I want that for all of us.
Yeah. 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 I do too.
Okay, final question. How do we make this better?
Mm.
Short
Hmm.
term,
I
short term,
think we
long
need
term.
I think we need to stick together.
Okay.
And even in our conversations on social media, there have been some ideas that I've seen put forward that I feel have gotten attacked, right? And
Yeah,
licensure, I think, is one of those
it's a good one.
examples, right?
Yep.
So let's stick together. Let's try to be a little bit more objective. I think we're all trying to do the same thing, and that is to raise the profession up. So let's actually act like we're raising each other up. Let's recognize there's enough for everyone, that we don't have to fight over scraps. Let's find ways that we can mentor each other and help each other grow.
Yeah. Long term, what do we do?
I think that some of the things that I mentioned in here
Yeah.
are my long term, maybe even some of the things are kind of short term, actually,
Midterm.
goals.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. And the IAYT's got to get figured out.
That was going to be my final thing. If we're going to talk to the IAYT, because we know they're listening. I know they're listening. Every time I say something in that damn group, somebody gets an email 10 minutes later. I know they're paying attention. What do you want to tell? What can we tell them?
Hmm. My message is, and this has been my message since last January when I first started approaching the IAYT about concerns over the Q program, is the Q program's got to stop. Let's find better ways to work together with member input to advance ourselves. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot to that, but that's it.
There's a ton to that, especially that one phrase, member input, can be
Hmm.
unpacked in about 1,000 different ways. And I want the IAYT to figure out how that works for us.
Hmm.
Make this a conversation and not a billboard. That's been my message to them over and over that again, because they're a billboard and we want to talk, like we want to talk to them.
Yeah, we totally do.
Yeah, I don't think any of us wants to go off and start another organization. If they
No.
do, like, I mean, and I do think we hear that sometimes. We hear that like
Yes.
fantasy sort of idea
Yes.
of, I'm going to go start another organization. And then I say, come talk to me. I'll tell you how hard that is. It's
Yeah.
very freaking hard.
I, on the record, want to say I don't want to start another organization. Because people have asked me, will you start another organization? And I
Have
don't.
they?
And I would I want to point out like all of the years of work that went into the
Yes.
IAYT and that whole piece around like accreditation, standardization, that was years and years and years of effort. Now we
Yes.
even have a certification exam. Like when people start talking about that kind of stuff that the IAYT does and has done, my eyes glaze over. Like, and I kind of get a little queasy. Like,
Yeah.
no, I don't want to do that, right? So that part, there's just, I think there's so much there that they have done, and there's also so many big things that need to be opened up and worked through in a better way.
Yeah. Michelle, tell everybody how to find you and your amazing
Oh.
ideas.
Yeah, so innerpeaceyogatherapy.com is our main website that talks about the programs to train yoga teachers to become yoga therapists. Yogatherapycollective.org is the new site that I'm launching that's going to be a member site of resources to help professional yoga therapists. So that will be coming by the end of the year. And then people can always just kind of reach out to me via email as well, info@innerpeaceyogatherapy.com. I am pretty responsive to email. I'm not super responsive to social media. I'm a dinosaur.
Well, thank you for this conversation. I love your voice, by the way. I don't know if I've ever told you this in my
Mm,
life, but every time I hear you talk, I'm like, oh, it's Michelle's voice, and I love it. So I'm glad you have a podcast.
yeah, thanks so much, Rebecca. I loved being on your podcast today.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for joining us on the podcast today. Here are our key takeaways. First, it is true most yoga therapists are not looking at hospital settings as the first place that they're going to work. Especially in the beginning, when your skill set is building, a hospital doesn't often seem like a likely place for us to land. So, why is there this focus on getting us in healthcare settings, I wonder? Next, look, it is undeniable that we seek some kind of legitimacy within our profession. This is, I believe, because in our core, we know the benefit of the work we do, and it's normal and human for us to want to be taken seriously for that work. But also, I do think that idea of legitimacy leading to us making a living, if not thriving wage, well, that's a little bit conflated. Now, I've said this before. We shouldn't conflate those two things. Folks sell feet pics online for a lot of money. A thriving wage, you might say. But it doesn't mean that foot pic salesperson is a respected profession. Those two things are not necessarily connected. Next, portfolio careers are coming up yet again. The reality of the industry as it stands right now is that you're either privileged to have another non-yoga related income, like a second job or a spouse, or you have to maintain a portfolio career. Yoga therapists, even with our high level of training and experience, are required to do a lot of things. A lot of us still teach yoga classes. I do, as much to test my material as anything else. And we also see private clients and write and speak and train and travel and run other businesses. In order to make a living, many of us have to wear a lot of hats and do a lot of different kind of work. Next, oh my goodness, thank God someone said it. There is enough work for all of us. We do need to go fight for our work though and spread around the work amongst us. Next, the IAYT has a responsibility to the professionals that it allegedly represents. I mean, sort of. Legally speaking, they actually have no responsibility for us, in spite of the fact that they collect quote-unquote membership dues and have a quote-unquote membership portal. But while they are walking like a membership organization duck, they are not legally defined that way. Weird, huh? Next, what does member input in a yoga organization actually look like to you? Other than the requisite, we're listening posts and emails and meetings, how does an organization actually listen? Is that a really big ask? What are some of your ideas? Next, if this Q model or the 300-hour training for LHCPs goes forward, no matter what they call it, we need to call for a different model and organizational leadership to take charge of our industry. Or maybe we just need to call for a real talk about the actual relevance of organizations in our industry as a whole. And finally, testimonial and progress of your clients makes a difference. Collect testimonials if you can, because the best proof of being good at your job in this industry is when other people love your work well enough to say so publicly. Now, up next on the podcast, we have Lisa Pearson talking about the business and spiritual side of a yoga therapy career. Until then, thank you as always for listening, my friends. I am so grateful you chose to spend your time and energy and attention with me, and I will catch you around the water cooler next time.